to confess sins of the flesh and sins of lust, and we should, but people can ignore completely sins of pride. And it's like, sins of the flesh, yes, they're not good, but very often there's tension, you're trying to say no to it, there's all kinds of biology going on, there's all kinds of stuff on the inside, like, yep, it's kind of a mess. Pride, on the other hand, can be a lot more wicked and a lot more insidious. Seventh commandment, you shall not steal. Unjust taking or keeping of a neighbor's goods. Okay, this one has a bit of a bugger in the middle of it, because we have two things that we have to hold, and they're kind of in tension. The first one is that the church believes in private property. Absolute communism is a no. No, absolute communism is bad. Like this idea that people can't own private property or that it's immoral. Private property encourages us to strive for something. It gives us motivation. It's a good thing. However, we do believe that private property is not absolute, that there is a universal destination of goods that underlies private property. So what it means, for instance, in the case of someone who has a starving family and you have an excess of food, they have a right to your food that's like beyond your right to private property, because that's for human life. Now, they can't take everything that you have, but there's a bit of a balancing act here. So, for instance, if you're in a place like that gets hit by a hurricane and your family's starving and you go and take a loaf of bread from the grocery store, have you stolen something? Catholicism, Christianity would say no, because their private property is not absolute. Now, if you take 100 loaves of bread, if you steal all kinds of things from the store, yes. But in a sense, there's a sense where the universal destination of goods and caring for human life trumps basically everything else. Now, it's to a limited extent, so it's not an absolute universal destination of goods. Does that make sense? You kind of need them both. So not absolute communism, but also not absolute capitalism, the complete subjection of the poor by the wealthy. Like, no, those are both extremes to be avoided. The seventh commandment is also one of them that admits of gravity. The sixth commandment, basically, every violation of it is a mortal sin, most likely, in some way. At least it's grave matter. Seventh commandment, there's a big difference between you stole a paperclip from work and you stole $100,000 from someone who needs it. Does that make sense? It doesn't make stealing a paperclip from work good, especially if it's done intentionally. But it does mean that, like, paper clips are not the grounds for mortal sin. In the same way that driving 26 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone isn't ground for mortal sin. You know, driving 150 is. You also get arrested for involuntary manslaughter, at least in North Dakota, or attempted murder or something like that. So just know that you do have to balance things a little bit. You do have to ask, like, what was the intention of the person? You know, if you walk out of a store without paying for something and you, like, don't realize it, you haven't sinned against this commandment. Like, that's not a moral, like, you just genuinely didn't know. Now, if you realize it and you don't pay for it, or the people, there was a big story yesterday of, like, this woman who would go to checkout lanes and, like, scan paperclip boxes and then take items and put them, like, into the, you know, that would be, like, yes, that's outright stealing. So when we say the universal destination of goods, it's a very limited sense where that applies. It's not to say that stealing is okay if you're homeless or if you're in this situation. It's constrained, and it's meant to be constrained, and only to take what you need in order to survive. Theft. Coercive speculation. So this, what it means is, like, if you are engineering things, like, in order to cause the collapse of a company so that you make money, that's this kind of theft. Like, yes, that is immoral. So I think you could say, like some of the short sellers on Wall Street that set out to destroy companies in order to make money, that's this kind of coercive speculation. Doing poor work, stealing from your employer, laziness, tax evasion, stealing from the government. Yes, Christianity believes in paying taxes. St. Paul talks about it directly in the New Testament when he says, pay your taxes to Rome, when Rome is a pagan government that is trying to kill them. Like, there's a strong sense in Christianity that you have a duty to support the government insofar as it's not immoral and doing things. Now, as a Christian, I think you could make a decent argument. Do I have to pay taxes when the government's actually trying to kill me? You can have a debate. Talk to Father Slattery, talk to a moral theologian. But essentially, like cheating on your taxes, cheating on homework, cheating on X, Y, and Z, lying to the bank on a loan application, all of this kind of stuff. Yep, against this commandment. Breaking promises or contracts. Gambling. Gambling in and of itself is, you have to separate it out a little bit. So, for instance, if you have a group of friends and you go and play Texas Hold'em and watch a football game and have an evening and, have a few beers, have a good time, and you put $5 in, like, is that immoral? No. But there is kind of a slope here that you can get on very, very easily. Gambling is very, very addictive, running the odds. Like, one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about, for instance, is sports betting has exploded. This didn't exist a few years ago, and now this year I think it was something like $50 billion was spent on it. Where did that $50 billion come from? Because it came from somewhere. That kind of money doesn't just show up. And how many people has it ensnared just trying to make money? So gambling can become immoral. Enslavement. Failing to care for creation is, in a sense, kind of stealing from God or stealing from our stewardship. We are given, Pope Benedict talks about this in Caritas and Veritate. It's one of the best treatments of ecology and caring for creation in a human sense. This doesn't mean the sort of radical green leftist movement. But on the other hand, it does mean that we have a duty to care for this world as well as we can, to try and use animals and plants well, to be stewards of them, to be shepherds of them, not to be absolute rulers and sit on our little kingdom and try and extract the most amount of profit we can and leave the land as a barren waste. Social justice and society. We have a duty not stealing from the people around us. So absolute communism, atheistic communism isn't no, absolute no. So is absolute capitalism, like unrestrained, nothing, no care for the poor, no concern, just the wealthy get wealthier all the time and the poor get poorer all the time. Like, no, that's also immoral. Now, it's not a sinful responsibility on our part living in a society just when society does these things, but we do have a duty to work at building a society that is fair, that is just. Where you draw that line is a prudential judgment. You can say more regulation, less regulation. There's lots of variability on these things. You can have different opinions, but to the extremes, those are both excluded. Unjust wages, failing to pay workers. The church, Christianity was not a fan of like the robber barons of the Industrial Revolution that forced kids to work for 14 hours a day and paid them a pittance. That, we would say, is immoral. That's a mortal sin, a grave violation of this commandment. Failing to care for the poor. Again, we have a duty to care for those who are less fortunate. That duty doesn't extend to giving everything you have, is true, but it also excludes giving nothing that you have, especially in our society where we have more than we need. Eighth commandment, you shall not bear false witness, implies a commitment to the truth. God is truth. This is necessary for society. Being a witness of the gospel, that's a big deal. representing Jesus well when you are called to and in the situations where you live. So bearing false witness, lying, perjury, destroying someone's reputation, flattery, exaggeration, boasting, bragging, direct lies leading someone into error. Not every request for information is legitimate or morally binding. Just because someone asks you doesn't mean they have a right to know. You don't have to tell your crazy neighbor everything about your family. Now, we would say, I think the commandment obliges us to do our best not to lie to them directly, but you don't have to tell them. This becomes very, very difficult if you're dealing with old people and dementia. Like, you basically have to throw the rule book out and beat your head against the wall, because they'll get convinced of things. Like, my grandfather would come over to our house after he had dementia, and he decided that he built that house and he had always lived there. And he didn't know why it looked like this because it was his house and he should be able to tell you how it was supposed to look. And it was worthless to try and explain to him that that wasn't the case and it wasn't his house. Eventually you just had to say, okay, because we tried. Like, you try for a while and you're eventually like, okay, this isn't going to work. And I think, again, as much as you can, the commandment is about a commitment to the truth. You know, in this case, committing to love the person is important, but we have to be careful because, again, we get really ready to justify our own actions and to say, well, this is completely okay, and that's not always a good thing. One of the things that I think can get people in trouble is they'll talk about, well, little white lies. First of all, how do you know they're little? What makes you think that they're white? And, you know, how much of a lie are they? And again, there's times where you do have to make a decision. If grandma asks you how the cookies were, you don't have to say they were horrible and burnt and we threw them all out. Sometimes it's good to say things like, we're really happy that you made them for us. Thank you. You know, you've acted for the truth of a situation, right? So there are ways, and this is good. This takes practice. But you should work not to tell direct lies. You know, in cases where things get really, really sticky, they get really, really sticky and it's really, really hard. We can talk about some of those in a bit. Oh boy, we better move fast. Respecting confidentiality. Insofar, now again, we would say this isn't an absolute thing. So confidentiality, trade secrets, those kinds of things. You have a duty to respect it until you get to the case of like danger to human life, danger to society, those kinds of things. If you work for a law firm that's plotting to take down the US government or plotting to murder 1 million people, you lose the duty to respect confidentiality and you gain the duty to act for the good of society. Hopefully that makes sense. I think it's kind of logical. And most of the time, that's the way the laws work anyway, so far. Immoral use of social media. The church, when it's talking about social media, you'll actually see this appear in the catechism. Doesn't mean social media as we think of it now. It means like media that's to other people. So they would be thinking mostly of like television and broadcast, but it definitely applies by extension to social media as we have it now. Creating bad art. Like, yeah, there's some of that art is in the eye of the beholder, but again, we have a duty to truth and beauty and goodness, and working intentionally to distort that or to cause scandal to lead people in a bad direction, that would be a violation of the commandment. 9 and 10 I combined because they're a little bit hard. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's goods. This is like a desire that's again outside of its place. It's outside of its context. We are temples of the Holy Spirit. We are called to be sons and daughters of God. So living in such a way that we respect that unrestrained desire is bad. Desire for earthly things, desire for food, desire for pleasure, all of it. Dressing immodestly is a big one in this kind of direction. Leading someone else to sin. So these are kind of the commandments that outlaw envy. But we have to be a little bit careful because sometimes people get convicted like any desire for a good thing that you see someone else has is envy. And that I would say no, like it's not envy. It can actually even just be a normal human reaction. You see someone who has a nice house and you're like, oh, I would like to have a nice house. That's not envy. Envy is a more negative turn of like, I want them not to have it. Like I can't have it, so they shouldn't have it either. One, like when it becomes a desire to destroy, to tear apart, to tear down, like that is envy. You know, you see the neighbor have a good car and you're like, I'd like to have a good car. That's fine. You see it as a status symbol and it becomes like attraction to things of this world, like, that's a commandment. Like that's what it's talking about, how we can get attracted to physical stuff in this world. So there are things that are good that you feel attracted to. You know, you'd like to have a vacation home. You'd like to be able to go to Florida. That in and of itself isn't envious. Does that make sense? It's not a violation of the commandment. Like to just desire something good because you see it, fine, fair enough. But there's a caveat because we do easily get attached to worldly things. Greed is real. Envy, like covetousness, this desire to grab and to hold on, to accumulate stuff, that's very, very real. Attachment to worldly comforts. Yay, we made it. So those are the last set of the commandments.